I wanted to say, Council President, colleagues, my dear family, and well-wishers, near and far, it is an absolute honor to stand before you today as the newly elected council member for the best district in Seattle, District 5.
Those are the words of Seattle City Council member Kathy Moore right there from her swearing in last year, who is stepping down from her role just a year and a half into a 4-year term. Why is she stepping down? And what does this mean for the future of the city council? Plus, which former city council member wants to throw her hat into the ring for a U.S. congressional seat? And how will a new amendment on legislation meant to speed up light rail construction actually impact the work of Sound Transit? So many questions, and now is the time to discuss them on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel, and the views expressed here are mine. I'm back with my co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, my gardening friend, I'm noticing you have a little color there on your face, so I want to make sure that I get your take on this. A truck rolls over in Whatcom County. Somewhere between 14 and 250 million bees escaped. A lot of different numbers circulating out there, including a lot of bees. Is now a time to celebrate with more pollination and honey for everybody, or a moment of terror before the end times with 6 more plagues to come? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know enough about bees. I imagine they'll just find a spot and create a nest, and now we can all go foraging for honey, for wild honey.
I hope so. That did sound pretty scary at the time. That was a lot. We'll see what happens there. Well, thank you, David. Thanks to everybody listening. Thanks especially to those who are patrons of the show. A shout out this week to Matthew, who just became a patron. Also to Jimmy, who's leaving the area, will no longer be a patron, but appreciate your years of support there, Jimmy. Matthew, I guess, has taken his place, now gets access to patrons first content before anybody else, gets to send in his questions for the show. He'll also get a Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. So, Matthew, please check your email. I need to know where to send this thing. Let me know on that. Finally, a shout out to Converge Media and a happy birthday to its founder, Omari Salisbury. Remember, the video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get this going with Right Here, Right Now. Pretty shocking twist for the Seattle City Council this week, as District 5 Representative Kathy Moore says she is stepping down. That resignation is effective July 7th, and whatever replacement the council appoints will serve a roughly 16-month term. Then voters would choose a replacement for a 1-year term in 2026, and then 2027, D5 is back on the ballot with the rest of the district seats. So those are the hits, runs, and errors. But David, were you surprised to see Kathy Moore stepping down?
Yeah, I was. There had been some kind of chit-chat about someone maybe sort of thinking about stepping down, but the suddenness of this caught me off guard. She says it's related to health, though her statement seemed to also apply. It was kind of a little more than that. And, those two things can go hand in hand. I mean, poor health can be exacerbated by stressful working conditions. And it certainly caught me off guard.
And I guess we're going to get into the fact that she had a very recent setback with an ethics bill that she was bringing forward very recently. I guess, being a judge, maybe she's not used to so much of a lack of decorum, which definitely has been happening over the past few months with the council here. Maybe frustrated by the lack of some of the action on her public safety bills when it comes to soap and soda, those stay out of areas of prostitution, stay out of drug areas. I think she ran into a few roadblocks on council, that's for sure, in her year and a half there.
Yeah, she has. I should preface by saying this is all basically pure speculation at this point.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't have much beyond what she has said publicly. But you're right. I mean, Councilmember Moore was probably, I don't want to say she was oftentimes the most frustrated, but she was not. It was not uncommon to see outward frustration from Councilmember Moore and to speak that frustration.
Yes.
And it happened with, staff, with her colleagues, with several times the general public, kind of voicing a frustration. And, in a way that really did remind me of when you're listening to a judge who gets frustrated with something a lawyer has done, and they feel free to speak that. And you saw that a lot with Councilmember Moore. And so, yes, you're right. And she often found herself kind of in the middle of pretty hairy political fights. Yeah. Not to say that the others haven't, but like you said, the soap legislation, that got pretty intense. She was basically called racist for running it. Right. While on the other hand, the neighbors who lived in that area were pressing her really hard to do something about it.
Yes, right.
She really put herself in the middle of the comprehensive plan fight because she was the most vocal and accusatory, honestly, of certain people's motives around adding density and really kind of made herself a target of people who are pushing for more density because she was the most vocally skeptical of some of the proposed changes to housing in Seattle.
Right.
And then, like you said, this ethics bill really became something bigger than I think that she honestly expected. I think she expected that, hey, this is a recommendation from the head of the Ethics Commission.
It should just go right through. Yeah.
I'll be the steward of what I see as basically an administrative change. It certainly did not turn out that way. Yeah. And she was the one who was working on this landlord, long rumored, I think it's more than a rumor. We knew what they were working on. Long discussed landlord-tenant bill that still has not seen the light of day, but even behind the scenes was getting pretty politically intense. And so I think all that combined, I don't know if that's what added up to her leaving, or I don't know the extent of her health issues, but it is true that she often found herself in the middle of some kind of intense political fights.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that ethics bill again in just a second, but just this whole idea of Kathy Moore's departure and how that affects the makeup of the council. I'm guessing that the moderate majority is going to want to bring in another moderate candidate for the next 16 months here. But do you have a feel for that in terms of how that change is going to affect the council over the next year or so? I know there have been people like Nailu Jenks, who ran against Kathy Moore a couple of years ago, who said, I'll jump in on that role, but I don't think that's the council's first choice here, probably.
Yeah, I think it will change the dynamic. It's hard to vote count with Kathy Moore in some ways because I think she was sort of among the wild cards on a council. I think it was easy to say that it was a predictable council because, the moderates or whatever. But and that's true for some of them. But in the middle, you really did have Kathy Moore and Joy Hollingsworth, who I think were seen as votes that could move.
Yeah, Kathy Moore pushing back on less lethal weapons. I remember that not too long ago.
Pushing back on less lethal weapons. It was really her and Hollingsworth that killed the app-based delivery driver bill from Council President Nelson. Not that it was explicit, but they were very much on the fence and were negotiating some kind of deal that never came through. She proposed this capital gains tax, but then, on public safety stuff, she was always on the side with the moderates. So I think on balance, sure, she fit better into that, quote, moderate block than, of course, the more progressive one. But she was less predictable than I think some of them. Where her exit really, I think, will matter is on two things. The most significant to me is this landlord-tenant regulation bill. I think a lot of people, particularly in the affordable housing space, assumed this bill was a done deal, which would have likely changed the city's rules around when evictions could happen, how much upfront screening landlords could do of their tenants, things like that. I think a lot of affordable housing providers who had actually been pushing for this bill assumed that this was on its way out the door any minute. It was going to get passed. That got complicated in recent weeks and months, and it still hasn't seen the light of day. And now that she's resigning, I have a really hard time seeing that bill ever seeing the light of day, at least this year. And so I think that is a pretty specific and consequential change of her leaving. The other one, which is maybe a little less concrete, is just around housing. I think her voice has been the most skeptical, we can say, of some of the proposed changes, particularly around neighborhood centers and the bulkiness of certain development. And her exit, I think, could change that conversation a little bit, though not as drastically as the landlord-tenant stuff.
Yeah. In terms of this whole idea of legislation not seeing the light of day, it's so interesting to talk about what happened with this ethics bill. And again, a quick review here, folks. This was the whole idea that council members would disclose a conflict of interest and still be able to vote on certain measures rather than recuse themselves and not vote. But clearly, Kathy Moore did not have the support for this. She actually pulled this legislation last week. This whole business of pulling legislation, I've watched the council for a long time. I know you have too. This situation doesn't happen that often, but now we're talking about an ethics bill here that is the fourth one that's been pulled out of action in the past couple years. There were two bills that had to do with wages that were pulled last year. Then there was that bill that would have put more restrictions on the city's equitable development initiative. What does this say to you to see so many bills getting pulled?
I think that's what happens when you have a baby council, which is really what this is. Not to say that they're all young, but it's when you have 6 brand new people come in. And then not only that, I mean, it's more than that, really, because then Councilmember Morales left. Even Council President Nelson, though she had been an aide, of course, for a long time, she is still in her first term. This is just a deeply inexperienced council. And I think a more experienced council, I think it's one thing to know what issues you find important. And I think it's another thing to understand how to usher that out in a way that you can be fairly confident it will stand up to public scrutiny and will retain its votes. And I just think there have been a few times when, setting aside the whether or not you think these bills were a good idea or not, they weren't sort of bulletproofed enough, both from a policy perspective and a political perspective. And that was certainly the case with the two wage bills. At least the app-based delivery driver bill, that actually got committee hearings. The tip credit bill from Councilmember Hollingsworth, that never even got a committee hearing, because that ran into opposition so quickly. And I think it was sort of, this council came in sort of with a mandate in a way. They felt very confident because their side had won so convincingly. They'd swept out the progressives. And I think with that came, and this is admittedly opinion here, but I do think that came with a bit of bravado in what they were doing. And that didn't always work to their favor, because the public wasn't always as fully on board with some of their proposals as they thought, perhaps. And that just made the politics of it really challenging. And this ethics bill was really a big example of that to me, which is its rollout did not kind of the tenor of its rollout did not match the tenor of how it was received by any stretch.
That's right. And having the mayor push back on it gave it some interesting political tug of war going on there too.
Right. And it's not just the bills that got pulled, like Council President Nelson Soto bill. I mean, that passed, but that was done in a way that it really pissed off a lot of people. So even on the bills where they succeed, that was a 6-3 vote. 6-3 vote on a controversial bill like that. It's a housing bill and it's still got a 6-3 vote. I mean, that's, I think past councils would have probably taken longer to try and get that to something like an 8-1 or 9-0 vote. I think the politics are something that you can't really prepare for and are something that you learn on the job. And when you have 7 people learning those politics on the job, you run into stuff like this.
Yeah, so interesting to see how this is going to pan out with the new person that comes onto the council, what happens with the comprehensive plan vote. I mean, there's a lot ahead for this, inexperienced council to work with here over the next couple of months and into the budget, which we're going to talk about later on the show too. But coming up, just when you thought national elections couldn't get any more exciting, have I got a deal for you. A former Seattle City Council member says she is running for Congress in our state's 9th congressional district. We've got the story next on. Now hear this. Well, here we go, folks. Kshama Sawant, former Seattle City Council member, announced this week that she is running for Congress. She wants the seat held by longtime Congressman Adam Smith in the 9th District, which runs from the southeast Seattle area out to Bellevue and then south down to Federal Way. Sawant said this in a press conference Monday. Her approach to the U.S. Congress would be just like the way she has approached the Seattle City Council.
Just as I used my city council election campaigns to build momentum for the $15 minimum wage and the Amazon tax, I will use my congressional election campaign to help build the anti-war movement and to launch a historic fight for Medicare for all.
Some footage from Status Quo News there. And David, Sawant has stayed on message, really, even when she showed up at the Democratic convention last year, where you remember saying Kamala Harris deserved to lose. But is it enough to bring down a candidate in Adam Smith, the longest serving member of the U.S. House delegation? How do you look at this entrance of Kshama Sawant into this race?
Yeah, I mean, the left wing has been interested in unseating Adam Smith for a while now. The years run together, but there was a challenger, a sort of progressive challenger a few years ago. I think the model that people are thinking of is the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You find safe seats that are always going to vote Democrat, and you challenge from the left and hope that you can kind of pull the caucus to the left that way. And Adam Smith is a pretty centrist Democrat. So I think as a result, he was seen as a target. It just has not worked yet. And I think for a lot of reasons, one of them is it's not the Bronx. This is, southeast Seattle, of course, is quite diverse and left-leaning. But, when you talk about Bellevue and the east side and stuff, this isn't that is much different than the Bronx.
Oh, yeah.
So, this is the highest profile name to challenge him from the left, and former Councilmember Sawant. I have a hard time not calling her Councilmember Sawant.
Yeah, me too.
But it's a long shot for sure. Her popularity and her polling was already not great in Seattle before she ran again. And we're bringing in whole parts of the suburbs where Sawant is seen as kind of emblematic of what some people were skeptical of in Seattle.
Yes, right.
I will say that the image of Kshama Sawant in Congress is hilarious. It's really hard to remember.
Yeah,
I mean, that is oil and water right there. But I think that's part of the idea is, it's worth shaking it up. I mean, it would be quite the show. And, maybe I could pitch a trip to Washington, D.C. to cover it.
There you go. Well, just going down that path a little bit further with Adam Smith, he is a Democrat, a centrist, though, and has been very critical of the Democratic Party. He actually spoke out earlier this year about Seattle area politicians, not happy with them. He told the Wall Street Journal last year, extreme left politics is leading us into a ditch. Pramila Jayapal had to have a heart-to-heart with them. I know a lot of people reported on that. I guess I'm trying to figure out what kind of spice that adds into the mix with this election.
I think that's right. I mean, my colleagues Dan Beekman and Jim Brunner, I think, really got at the heart of this, which is how interesting it is that Jayapal's district and Adam Smith's district touch each other. Those two people are sort of emblematic of the tensions within the Democratic Party right now. One kind of arguing in Jayapal that the reasons the Democrats are losing is they are not committed enough or values-based enough and need to kind of go harder on some of these progressive issues and not kind of partner with the Liz Cheneys of the world. Whereas Adam Smith is saying, it's Democrats are out of touch. They're getting too pulled in by a minority of left-wing, extremists. They're too focused on identity politics. And so, Sawant here is kind of putting to test the question of, what do people in the Seattle area want in their Democratic Party? Is it more of an Adam Smith type or is it more of a Pramila Jayapal type? Again, it's not a great apples to apples test from a demographic standpoint because Jayapal represents a much more progressive district than Adam Smith does.
Right.
When I saw that Sawant was announcing, I actually thought for a second that maybe she was going to challenge Jayapal.
Oh, interesting.
She's been critical of anyone who's aligned with the Democratic Party, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Right.
I thought Sawant lived in Jayapal's district. I guess I don't know the rules around that. But anyway, I think it can be seen as a test between the centrist Democrats and the left-wing Democrats. I do think Sawant brings with her a particular set of baggage and history that might not make that such a clean test. And she is not a Pramila Jayapal. She is a Trotskyist. She is a
right.
People accuse someone like Jayapal of being a Marxist. Kshama Sawant is a Marxist. And so
got the paperwork. Right. Okay.
It is its own thing, and she's very well known. So I will say this: it will make what is often a sleepy race in that district at least, kind of interesting and worth watching.
It will be an interesting one. I've seen Sawant lighten up AOC and Bernie Sanders and all the rest of them. So I know that Adam Smith is getting in the way too. We'll see what happens next there for the 9th Congressional District. I did want to turn back to the council here, and an interesting turn for the Land Use Committee late last week. I want to break this down with you, David. Councilmember Maritza Rivera brought forth an amendment to the council's proposal to speed up light rail permitting. This came down from the mayor's office. The council's been working to push this through. Now, Rivera walked this on, as it's called, meaning she did not give her colleagues or the council staff who was presenting at the meeting a heads up about it. That does happen, not all the time, but not too far out of the ordinary. The amendment she's talking about to call for more public input as Sound Transit expands light rail brought a number of questions, though, from council staff and from some of her colleagues. And my thanks to the Urbanist for reporting on the story. But David, is this measure from Councilmember Rivera going to help in the effort to speed up permitting for Sound Transit? What do you think?
I mean, we were talking about bills that come out with the assumption that they're easy and not controversial, and then turn out to be that. This kind of fits into that category. The extent of how important it is, I don't know. But if you're talking about speeding up light rail, I mean, by definition, introducing more process will not do that. Not to say that there's not value in the process they're proposing, but I also don't think it is a nothing amendment. I think the assumption was it was a pro forma technicality.
Yeah. Rivera was saying this is a friendly bill, and I know a lot of people were pushing back.
Right. And I think that, I think for a lot of people, the core problem of Sound Transit is that it is obsessively seeking feedback from every corner of the population. And so, I think this does kind of fit into people's pre-existing frustrations with Sound Transit. And so, again, I don't want to weigh in on the value of the amendment, but I will say it's not a zero amendment. To say that it doesn't have some kind of substance to it doesn't really track. So again, to bring it back to this council, I think this comes up a lot, which is things come out that when they're crafted in the offices, are seen as easy things to do or not particularly controversial, and then they turn out to be. And I think, again, perhaps a more experienced council would understand that. And as such, I think we see frustration with this council. You know, they I think there was some frustration in Councilmember Rivera's voice, or at least confusion about why would people be opposed to this, when in fact, if you knew kind of what was going on with Sound Transit and people's frustrations with the pace, you would know that there would be some interest in an amendment like this and probably some pushback. So again, not to weigh in on its value or not, but it is a real thing, and it is worthy of public discussion. Ahead of
Yeah, for sure. Councilmember Rivera in that meeting said she was stunned by the pushback there. But I really did see a split council on this.
Which is whose fault is that? I mean, the implication there is that is the someone else's external fault. In fact, if you're stunned by the reaction to an amendment, perhaps you did not understand the full scope of its implications, because or the opposite interpretation is you think that this is a bad faith opposition, and if you want to make that argument, you can. It's a little bit harder one to make for me.
Fair. I guess just in looking what the council might do here, because it looks like the Land Use Committee is going to get back in place again on Wednesday, just a little bit after we're releasing this podcast. Sounded like Councilmember Moore thought it was a good idea to add this amendment in. Councilmembers Rink and Strauss had some concerns. They're pairing up on a lot of things here. Do you see this amendment having a future? I know it's a little early to tell here, but there sure were a lot of question marks around this last week.
Yeah, I think it might have a future. And again, it might be a valuable thing for the city to do. I think Rivera sits in that sort of political block that has the most consistent majority. If she's willing to put in the time and energy to kind of whip votes for it, I think she can find it. But it's not, Rink and Strauss being against it shows that it's not automatic.
Yeah, not a slam dunk in the least here. We'll see what happens with that later on this week and keep you posted on that score. But I did want to talk about something coming up next year, a budget update that's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past from the Seattle City Council. What does that mean? What are the city's finances really looking like? We're going to take a look at this coming up on What's Next. So this week, a few things cooking. The council looks like it's going to work to get some of these electronic kiosks in place downtown. We'll see what happens next there. But you may not have seen the budget committee for the council is laying out a little bit of a different process for the rest of the year. What's not different here? The mayor is going to present his budget adjustments on September 23rd. As we've seen in many years past, the council is due to have their work done on the budget by November 21st before Thanksgiving, like they always do. What's new? The first public hearing will be shifted by about a week to get more input there in the process. And there's this kind of additional phase of the budget process worked in before the chair's balancing package is presented. The idea there, at least is how the council is presenting this, is to provide some more context as to what's going into that package, and then also requiring any amendments to have two co-sponsors by October 21st, so kind of raising the bar there a little bit. I know these are some behind-the-scenes changes here, David, and maybe minor changes to some folks, but I really am seeing this effort to kind of streamline things from Councilmember Strauss, maybe push for any amendments to come sooner rather than later. What do you make of what Strauss is trying to do here?
Well, I mean, I'll caveat with, I was saying I was on parental leave during the last budget session, but my sense is it was chaotic at times. And I think that came from, a lot of amendments coming in late. Mm-hmm. Of course, part of it too is you're trying to figure out how to plug this hole. But I think
as someone being on parental leave, you were seeing plenty of chaos at the time. So you definitely had some good context. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think my sense is it's a hope to avoid that again. Going to be another tricky budget season. There's more holes to plug. I mean, in some ways it's going to be harder because they've got about the same size of hole that they need to plug, but the jumpstart is not going to be as readily available to plug that. So anyway, it's going to be a complicated budget season, and my sense is last time was pretty chaotic. So hopefully this new process can cut down on some of that.
Yeah, that is the hope, and I'm glad you're back for this season here, David, because we definitely need some help with it. Let me keep going down the path that you're going there, because I'm looking overall at the city's budget. We're going to get another fiscal update for the city in August, so I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like. I don't think the city really knows either. The deficit is sitting at about $150 million right now. And I definitely wanted to bring this in. We heard earlier this week that President Trump is trying to put more pressure on so-called sanctuary cities like Seattle, as the White House is really ramping up its immigrant deportation policies. I guess I was looking at that threat, David, of possibly pulling federal funding from Seattle. Is the financial forecast going to be any less bleak come August with tariffs still kind of jumping up and down? Do you have any sense of this? I know you're not a financial expert, but it just seems like so many moving parts right now.
No, I mean, I haven't seen any reason that it would change. Stock market's doing better than it was last time the forecast came. So there is that. But I think their recommendation that Seattle adopt the pessimistic forecast was based in just a general total uncertainty about what was next. And I think that's still true. It would be hard to argue that anyone has any more clarity about whether tariffs are going to be a real thing or not.
Right.
So no, I don't see any reason why the August forecast would at least meaningfully change how they have to approach the budget season.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, a lot of time in between now and then, but I don't know if there's enough time to really make a substantial change in what the city's looking forward to, which is going to be something pretty difficult, again, this budget season here. It is time to wrap up with you here, David, and I did want to ask you this. I saw it in Mariners news this week. We're hearing that former Mariner Randy Johnson will have his number 51 retired by the M's next season. A nice touch after number 51 will also be retired to honor Ichiro on August 9th of this year. And I thought this was great. 35 years ago, Randy Johnson threw the first no-hitter in Mariners history and then got them to their first ever postseason 5 years after that. So I wanted to throw it at you. Where do you stack up Randy Johnson among the all-time greatest Mariners? What do you think?
It's tough because I think prerequisite for being an all-time Mariner is doing the best part of your career as a Mariner.
Yeah.
And it's hard to argue that Randy Johnson's best years were with the Mariners. He went on to win a couple Cy Youngs and a World Series with the Diamondbacks. So
yeah, with Arizona.
But as far as what I will say, though, is as a young kid watching the Mariners, it was like, and I would mark the days that Randy Johnson was going to pitch. If I got to go to the Kingdome and Randy Johnson was pitching, it was like a highlight. Like he was truly must-see in a way that no pitcher since then has been for me as a Mariners fan. So in that sense, he ranks pretty highly for me.
Yeah, still second in all-time franchise leaders in strikeouts and wins. Starts and innings pitched is third. I mean, this guy really brought the thunder. I'm with you. I mean, he was scary to watch. I know for batters. I remember seeing John Kruk backing out of the batter's box during that one All-Star game just out of fear. So anyway, big cheers to number 51, the big unit. More power to you, Randy. Awesome to see him.
I was at a game when they were playing the A's, and Mark McGwire hit it's like a 530-foot home run off Randy Johnson, which is still to this day one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
Yeah, some of the juicing aside, we'll leave that for a whole other day. But yeah, very, very cool to see that. And then 51 complete games with Seattle. I don't think that's ever going to happen again in history. So anyway, more power to you, big unit. Well, thank you, David. And thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. Really do appreciate you. Thanks for being a part of this. And also, we would love to see more pledges from anyone and everyone starting at just $5 a month on Patreon. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. See you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.